Here's a deep, detailed, crystal-clear summary of the whole thing you gave me. No skipping, no confusing words, just a complete picture from start to finish. Number 1. Background. By the mid-1700s, the East India Company was not just a trading business anymore. It had its own army and had defeated powerful Indian rulers in battles like Plassey, 1757, and Buxar, 1764. After Buxar, it became the most powerful force in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. However, it still needed legal permission to rule and collect taxes, and that's where the Mughal Emperor came in. Number 2. The Deal of 1765, the Diwani. Date, August 12, 1765. Who made it? Robert, company leader, and Shah Alam II, Mughal Emperor, weak and powerless. What happened? The Mughal Emperor gave the company the Diwani, the right to collect land revenue, taxes, and run civil administration in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In return, the company would pay 26 lakh rupees per year to the emperor, 53 lakh rupees per year to the Nawab of Bengal for running the Nizamat, criminal justice, law and order. Meaning, the company got control of the biggest source of income in eastern India while paying the old rulers a fixed pension. Double government, theory versus reality. In theory, on paper, company equals Diwan, tax collection, civil law. Nawab equals Nazim, criminal law, police. In reality, the Nawab had no army and no independent money. He was completely dependent on the company for his salary. The company controlled all real power. Effect, the Nawab became a figurehead. He had a title but no control. Number 4. How the company ran things. Clive appointed deputy Diwans. Muhammad Reza Khan, Bengal, Raja Shitab Rai, Bihar. They handled land revenue collection, customs duties, tax on trade, civil justice, property disputes, contracts. Everything was done in the company's interest, not for the benefit of the Mughal Emperor, the Nawab, or the local people. 5. The pretend sovereignty. The company kept a fiction. Pretended the Mughal Emperor was still sovereign, supreme ruler. Pretended the Nawab still ruled Bengal. In truth, both were powerless. This was done so ordinary people would not see the company as a direct ruler yet, making the takeover seem less obvious. Number 6. Why this was important. Real shift of power. The right to collect taxes gave the company the real control over the region's money and administration. Start of British rule. This was the foundation of the British political system in India. Later, British laws and constitutional acts built on this. Wealth for expansion. Bengal's revenue funded the company's army and future conquests. Weak governance. Because power was split on paper but controlled by one side, corruption grew and administration suffered. Public suffering. Heavy tax demands and mismanagement contributed to famines, like the Bengal famine of 1770. Number 7. Key takeaways. The Diwani of 1765 turned the East India Company from a trader into a ruler. The double government was just a disguise. The company was in full control. Local rulers, Nawab Emperor, became pensioners. The people of Bengal saw this as being farmed out to a profit-seeking company. This was the turning point in the political history of India under the British. If you like, I can now give you a diagram-style visual that shows exactly how power and money flowed between the company, the Nawab, and the Emperor, so you can see in one glance why this system was fake on paper but real for the company. Do you want me to make that? Deep, detailed summary, in the simplest words. Short one line. In 1765, the East India Company legally took the right to collect taxes in Bengal, but it ran the region through a hidden system that kept Indian officials in place while the company took the money. This made the company rich, left local rulers powerless, caused misrule and suffering, and pushed Britain to demand a share and later to take more control. Number 1. What exactly happened? The deal. Date and people. On the 12th of August 1765, Robert Clive got a firman, an imperial order, from the weak Mughal emperor. What the firman gave: the Diwani, the right to collect land revenue, taxes, and run civil administration in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. Money promised. The company agreed to pay 26 lakhs rupees a year to the emperor and 53 lakhs rupees a year to the Nawab, the local ruler, to keep the Nawab's criminal administration, Nizamat, running. 26 lakhs equals 2,600 rupees, 53 lakhs equals 5,300 rupees. Plain example, It's like a firm getting the legal right to collect rent from a whole district while paying the old landlords a fixed pension so they still look like rulers. Number 2, double government on paper, masked system in reality. On paper, theory, 2 separate roles. Company equals Diwan, revenue, civil courts. Nawab equals Nazim, Nizamat, police, criminal law. In reality, the Nawab had no independent money or army, so he only appeared to rule. Indian administrators ran day-to-day work, but they did it under company orders. This hidden control is called a masked system. Plain example, the company was the boss who sat elsewhere and gave instructions. Local officials did the work, but for the company's benefit. The old rulers were like paid figureheads. Number 3, why the company used a masked system, its main motive, main goal, money. The company had expensive armies and needed big, steady income. Bengal's taxes were huge. Why hide it? If the company openly said, "We are the government," it would take legal responsibilities, risks, and political scrutiny. Instead, it kept the appearance of old rulers and simply collected the profits. Plain example, someone collects rent secretly and keeps repairs and responsibilities off their books while enjoying the income. Number 4. Reaction in Britain. People in Britain noticed the huge expected income from Bengal, estimated at £4,000 per year, a huge sum then. A few politicians, including Pitt, argued the Crown should take control from the company. Most didn't want to. Parliament's first move, 1767, not takeover, but a demand for £400,000 per year as the government's share of the gains, i.e. a tax tribute on the company's profits. Plain example, the government saying, "You keep running the business, but we'll take a fixed share of the profit." Number 5. Immediate consequences on the ground. Local rulers lost power. The Nawab and the Emperor kept titles, but real power and money were gone. Indian administrators did the work. Company-appointed or company-controlled deputies collected taxes and ran civil courts. Corruption and weak administration. The split between nominal titles and real control made oversight poor. Local agents often exploited people to meet revenue targets. Human cost. Heavy extraction and poor administration contributed to suffering and famines, e.g. Bengal famine of 1770 is often linked to this period's misrule. Number 6. Medium and long-term consequences. Turning point. The Diwani was the turning point from a trading company to a ruling power. Control of revenue gave the company the means to expand political and military control. Parliamentary intervention grew. Britain slowly moved from taking a cut to making laws to regulate the company. Regulating Act 1873, Pitt's India Act 1784 are examples of this trend, and ultimately the Crown took direct control after the 1857 revolt, Government of India Act 1858. Economic and social change. Traditional elites were weakened. Some local industries declined, and Indian peasants and towns often suffered from new tax and trade systems. Number 7. Who gained and who lost? Simple. Gained. East India Company, huge profits, some company officials and British investors, and eventually the British government, taxes and control. Lost. Nawab and Mughal court, lost real power. Peasants and local artisans faced higher taxes and market disruption, and long-term stable local governance. 8. One-sentence final summary. The 1765 Diwani gave the East India Company legal control of Bengal's huge revenues while hiding its rule behind local figures. This masked takeover made the company rich, weakened local rulers, harmed ordinary people, and started the long process of transferring real political power from Indian rulers to the British state. Quick glossary, very short. Diwani equals right to collect land taxes and run civil administration. Nizamat equals criminal justice, police duties. Firman equals imperial order or decree. Masked system, hidden rule, appear not to govern, but actually control. Lakh equals 100,000, so 26 lakhs equals 2.6 million. Would you like this turned into a one-page timeline, a simple labelled diagram? Who had money, who had force, who had title, or that 4-panel comic showing the masked system? I can make any of those next in very simple language and pictures. Here's a deep and detailed summary of the passage in the clearest and simplest way possible, while keeping every important point intact. Summary of the dual government under Clive's successors, 1767 to 1772. 1. Continuing Clive's dual government system. After Clive left, two men ran Bengal under the same setup. Harry Verhulst, 1767–69, John Cartier, 769–72. The Nawab, local ruler, had no real power. He was only a figurehead. The real administration was run by the Deputy Nawab, chosen by the company, the English resident, British representative at the Nawab's court. All major decisions were taken by the English resident. 2. Power without responsibility, the main flaw. The British company controlled Bengal's government, but didn't directly take full responsibility for ruling. Indian officials still carried out daily work, but under British orders. This gap between control and responsibility caused major corruption and scandals. 3. Two major problems. A. Private trade abuses. Company officials began trading privately on the side, using their positions to pressure Indian administrators. Indian officials couldn't stop them. They were under company control and afraid to act. B. Oppression of peasants. The company wanted more revenue, tax money. Land tax collection was done by zamindars, landowners, or hereditary tax collectors. Many zamindars had powerful backgrounds. Some were descendants of old princely families. Problems. Some zamindars paid very little to the government when it was weak. They could bribe officials to reduce what they owed. When the company demanded more money, Indian revenue officers put extreme pressure on peasants to pay more. Result: peasants suffered the most. Heavy taxes, possible land seizure, and poverty. 4. Attempts to fix the problems. Verhulst tried to reduce corruption by appointing English supervisors to oversee Diwani tax collection lands. This backfired. Instead of solving issues, they caused more confusion and corruption. 5. No proper system of government. The company had wealth and control, but no clear, fair system for ruling Bengal. They were acting as rulers, but still pretending to be just traders. This mismatch caused chaos. 6. Financial disaster. In the 7 years the dual government lasted, the company was nearly bankrupt. It couldn't pay Parliament the agreed £400,000 per year. Company servants, individual officers, became very rich, showing how corrupt the system was. The situation became so bad that the British government had to step in to fix the mess. In short, from 1767 to 1772, Bengal was ruled under Clive's dual government, where the company controlled power but left responsibility to Indian officials. This led to massive corruption, exploitation of peasants, and financial ruin for the company, even while its officers grew rich. The mess eventually forced the British government to intervene. If you want, I can now make a visual chart or comic strip of this system to make it even easier to remember. That would show exactly how the power and money flowed and where corruption entered. Would you like me to do that? Here's a deep, detailed yet crystal clear summary of the part you gave. I'll make it full, simple and structured so you get every important point without any confusion. Deep, detailed summary. Circumstances leading to the Regulating Act of 1773. 1. Background. British start ruling parts of India. From 1765–72, the British East India Company began doing the job of ruling Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, but not openly or fully. This arrangement was called the dual government. The company collected taxes, revenue, and had real power. The Nawab of Bengal still looked like the ruler on paper but had almost no power. In reality, the company was in control, but it did not take responsibility for public welfare. 2. Why it was shameful. Historians, including those writing at the time, saw this as a disgraceful period in British history. A history book written then, Siyarul Mutakharin, said, "The new rulers, the British company, ignored the problems of the people. The officials chosen by the company treated people cruelly and without mercy. In short, the company wanted money, not responsibility." The 1770 Bengal famine, a disaster. In 1770, Bengal suffered one of the worst famines in Indian history. Natural cause, crop failure due to drought. Man-made worsening. The company kept collecting high taxes even when people had no food. Company officials were corrupt, often hoarding grain or selling it at high prices. There was almost no government relief to help starving people. Result: millions died. Some estimates say 1/3 of Bengal's population. Villages were emptied, farming land was abandoned, the administration completely collapsed. 4. Company's role in the disaster. The famine itself was not caused by the company. That was nature. But the suffering became far worse because, 1, they did not provide aid or reduce taxes. 2, they focused on revenue collection rather than relief. 3, their administrative system was weak and corrupt. British historian W.E.H. Lecky said, India had never faced such clever, thorough and strong oppression, meaning the cruelty was systematic and organised. 5. Why Britain decided to act. News of the famine and corruption reached England. Public opinion turned against the company. Many believed the company was too powerful, it was mismanaging its territories. If left unchecked, it could cause more disasters. The British Parliament decided to step in and regulate the company's rule. 6. Result. The Regulating Act of 1773. This was the first law passed by the British Parliament to control the East India Company's political and administrative work in India. Aimed to 1. Reduce corruption and misrule. 2. Create a central authority in Bengal. 3. Bring company decisions under Parliament's watch. It marked the beginning of direct British government oversight in India. Core essence in one sentence. The shameful dual government, 765 to 72, left Bengal under corrupt company officials who cared only for revenue, ignored public welfare, and failed completely during the 1770s, leading Britain to pass the Regulating Act of 1773, the first step to control company misrule. If you want, I can now make a coloured comic strip showing these events visually, so you can remember them instantly. Do you want me to make that next? All right, here's your great, deep, detailed summary of the whole passage and its background, written in very clear, simple English, but covering all important points, so nothing is missed. Summary. Between 1761 and 1773, the 12 years before Warren Hastings became the first Governor-General of India, a large number of British East India Company employees, servants of the company, returned to England from India. Many of them had become extremely rich during their time in Bengal, one of the richest regions in the world at that time. Much of this wealth was suspected to have been plunder, taken unfairly through corruption, exploitation of revenue collection rights, diwani, bribes, and private trade deals. The Bengal famine of 1770, which killed millions, made such suspicions even stronger, as company officials still extracted revenue during the disaster. The nabobs in England. These returning company men were nicknamed nabobs, a mocking term borrowed from the Indian word nawab, a local ruler. When they arrived in England, they had lavish spending habits and brought back Eastern luxury styles, fine silks, jewellery, Indian servants, hookers, exotic furniture, etc. They tried to enter aristocratic society, marrying into noble families, buying estates, and even joining politics. Their presence in high society was a major social change in 18th century England. Public reaction. The general public and the Old English nobility viewed them with contempt, believing they were corrupt and morally degraded. Envy, jealous of their sudden wealth and luxury. Hatred, resentful of their arrogance, foreign manners, and the suspicion that they got rich while ordinary Indians suffered. Contemporary memoirs, diaries, and letters from that time show these feelings clearly. The company's crisis. While these individuals grew personally richer, the East India Company itself was in serious financial trouble. It was almost bankrupt, on the verge of insolvency. It had to pay heavy costs for wars, administration, and dividends to shareholders. Corruption and private profit-taking meant much wealth never reached the company's official treasury. The company had few friends in England at this time. It was disliked by many politicians, the public, and even rival merchants. This made the bankruptcy even more dangerous, as no one was eager to rescue it. Shashtad. Blind folly of leadership. The directors, managers, and shareholders of the company had been behaving with blind folly for years. They focused on short-term profit and kept paying high dividends to themselves even when the company's finances were weak. They failed to control their officials in India, allowing corruption to run unchecked. They underestimated the cost of ruling and expansion and overextended the company in wars and administration. This poor leadership directly led to the crisis. Historical importance. This situation was one of the main reasons the British government stepped in with the Regulating Act of 1773, beginning official state control over the East India Company. Warren Hastings, appointed as the first Governor-General in 1774, inherited this messy situation and tried to stabilise the administration and finances. Key points in short: 1. 1761 to 1773, company employees returned to England very rich, suspected plunder from Bengal. 2. They become nabobs, showing off wealth, joining high society, adopting Eastern habits. 3. English society feels contempt, envy and hatred toward them. 4. Officers are rich, but the company is nearly bankrupt. 5. The company is widely hated. No one wants to help it. 6. Leadership of the company has been foolish, bad financial and administrative decisions. 7. Leads to government intervention in 1773. If you like, I can now make you a flowchart or timeline that visually shows how: Bengal's plunder, nabobs in England, public anger, company bankruptcy, government control. It will make this whole event easy to recall for exams. Do you want me to create that? Here's your great, deep, detailed summary of that passage. Very simple, but with full detail so nothing is missed. Deep, detailed summary. In 1769, the British East India Company was heavily in debt. It owed about £6 million. Despite this, its directors still declared a 12% dividend, a profit payout to shareholders. This was done dishonestly. They hid the real financial situation and falsified accounts to make it seem the company was doing well. Soon, 2 major disasters from India worsened the company's problems. 1. Bengal famine, killed millions and reduced tax revenues. 2. Hyder Ali's victories in South India's Carnatic region, military losses damaged the company's prestige and security. When news of these events reached Britain, the company's stock price collapsed. Rumours spread that the company was nearly bankrupt. In desperation, the directors borrowed £1 million from the Bank of England. This was only a temporary fix and not enough to save the company. The real crisis came when the directors turned to the British government for financial help. This ended the company's independence. Once the government was involved, it could now control company affairs. The ruling Tory government, led by Lord North, saw this as an opportunity to strengthen the British Crown's authority over the company, gain more political control over India. Lord North sent the company's request for help to Parliament for open discussion rather than quietly approving it. Parliament formed a select committee to investigate the company's affairs. This committee was led by General Burgoyne's statement during the inquiry. He called the company's corruption the worst abuses ever seen in government. He warned that political power, sovereignty and trade must be separated. If not, both India and Britain would be ruined. Key points in short: 1. Company in massive debt, £6 million, but still paying big dividends by lying. 2. Disasters in India, famine plus Hyder Ali's victories destroy confidence. 3. Share prices crash, panic. 4. £1 million Bank of England loan equals temporary relief. 5. Asking government for help, loss of independence. 6. Lord North uses this to increase state control. 7. Select committee under Burgoyne investigates corruption and warns of dangers of mixing trade with rule. If you want, I can now combine this summary with the earlier Nabob period crisis summary you asked me for earlier, so you get one complete flowing story of the East India Company's downfall from 1761 to 1773. That way you'll see how these events are connected step by step. Here's a deep, thorough, yet crystal clear summary of the passage you gave, including context, causes, events and results, so you get the full picture. Context. The year is 1772 to 1773. The British East India Company is ruling large parts of India. In Britain, people are watching closely because the company is not just a trader anymore. It's a territorial ruler, collecting taxes and running administration. The company is supposed to be making huge profits from India, but something strange happens that shocks everyone. What happened? 1. March 1772. The good news, or so it seemed. The East India Company announced a 12% dividend for its shareholders. A dividend means giving a part of the profit to people who own shares. A 12% dividend is very high. It signals big profits. Public message: we're doing great. 2. August 1772, the bad news. Just 5 months later, the same company went to the British government begging for a loan of £1 million. This looked suspicious. How can you be rich in March and broke in August? 3. Parliament smells trouble. The House of Commons notices this huge contradiction. They form a second, secret investigation committee to find out what's going on. MPs ask the key question. If the company is poor, why are its servants coming back from India with so much personal wealth? This hinted at corruption. The company's officials were getting rich, but the company itself was going bankrupt. 4. Spring 1773. The reports come out. The investigation reports are highly critical of the company's management. They condemn corruption of company officials, mismanagement of resources, reckless financial decisions, like paying high dividends when broke, exploitation and poor governance in India. 5. 2 new laws are passed. First law, Loan Act. The British government gave the company a loan of £1.4 million at 4% interest. But there were conditions. Limit on future dividends, stricter accounting and oversight, closer government monitoring of company decisions. Second law, the Regulating Act, 1773. The first major step for the British government to control the company. Main features: created the post of Governor-General of Bengal, with Warren Hastings soon appointed, to oversee all British territories in India. Made Bombay and Madras subordinate to Bengal in important matters. Established a Supreme Court at Calcutta. Increased government control over companies' directors in London. Tried to stop corruption by limiting gifts and personal trade of officials. 6. Resistance. The Regulating Act was strongly opposed by the company. Didn't want to lose its freedom, its allies in Parliament, shareholders, politicians benefiting from company money. But Parliament pushed it through, marking the start of direct state control over the company. Main causes behind the crisis. Private greed. Officials enriched themselves instead of the company. High and unsustainable dividends, paid to keep shareholders happy, even when profits were falling. Heavy war and administration costs in India. Bengal famine of 1770 reducing revenues. Poor accounting and secrecy. Real financial condition hidden. Effects. Government intervention began. The company could no longer act fully independently. The British Crown started setting rules for Indian administration. Company servants faced tighter discipline. The Regulating Act became the foundation for later laws that fully brought India under British government control. One-line essence. The East India Company looked rich but was actually broke due to corruption, mismanagement and overspending. Parliament investigated, condemned its conduct, bailed it out with strict conditions, and passed the Regulating Act 1773, starting direct government control. If you want, I can now convert this entire summary into a color-coded diagram plus timeline, so the events from March 1772 to Regulating Act 1773 are visual and unforgettable. That would make revising this in seconds super easy. Alright, here's your great deep detailed summary of the provisions of the Regulating Act of 1773, with all the important points packed clearly but fully. Deep summary of the provisions of the Regulating Act. 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773 was the first major step by the British Parliament to control and reform how the East India Company was run, both in England and India, because mismanagement was causing corruption and political trouble. It aimed to 1. Restructure the company's governing system in London, shareholders, directors and oversight. 2. Reform the company's administrative system in India, Governor-General, councils and control over presidencies. 1. Reforms in England, London-based control. A. Voter qualification raised. Before, any shareholder with £500 worth of shares could vote in the Court of Big Shareholders meeting. After, needed £1,000 worth of shares to vote. Purpose: reduce the number of voters, keep voting power in the hands of richer, more serious investors, and reduce bribery. B. Directors, term length increased. Before, 24 directors were elected every year for a 1-year term. After, directors now had a 4-year term. Each year, 1/4, 6 directors would retire and could be re-elected. Purpose: bring stability and long-term planning to company policies. C. Government oversight introduced. The company's directors had to send All letters about revenues and finances to the Treasury, British Finance Ministry. All letters about civil administration and military affairs to the Secretary of State. Purpose. For the first time, the British Cabinet got a legal right to monitor company affairs, though they couldn't yet directly control them. Nashnas 2. Reforms in India. Administrative control. A. Creation of the Governor-General and Council in Bengal. A Governor-General was appointed President of the Council with 4 council members. Decisions would be made by majority vote. If there was a tie, the Governor-General had a casting vote, tiebreaker. At least 3 members had to be present for decisions, quorum. Purpose. Reduce the risk of one man ruling without checks and balances. B. First team named by the Act itself. Governor-General Warren Hastings. Councillors Philip Francis, General Clavering, George Monson and Richard Barwell. They would hold office for 5 years, unless removed earlier by the King on the recommendation of the Court of Directors. Future appointments to be made by the company. C. Powers and authority of the Governor-General in Council. Complete civil, administration and law and military control over Bengal. Supervisory powers over Madras and Bombay in certain important matters, especially diplomacy and war. Purpose. Centralize power in Bengal to prevent other presidencies from making reckless political or military moves. 3. Additional measures, connected but not in your paragraph. A Supreme Court was to be established at Calcutta in 1774 with a Chief Justice and 3 other judges to enforce British law and reduce corruption. Overall impact. The Act was a starting point for British Parliament's involvement in Indian administration. It checked some abuses but was still imperfect. The company remained powerful and conflicts between the Governor-General and Council members often paralysed decision-making. It also created tension between British law and Indian traditions, especially due to the Supreme Court applying English law in India. This Act laid the foundation for further reforms, especially Pitt's India Act of 1784, which gave the British government stronger control. In essence, the Regulating Act 1773 tried to clean up the company's messy management by making shareholder voting stricter, making directors' terms longer, forcing the company to share information with the British government, creating a centralised leadership in India with checks on power, and setting up a proper court. If you want, I can now make you a super visual colour-coded chart so you can revise all provisions in under 20 seconds without rereading this whole text. That chart will make the Act unforgettable. Here's your great, deep, detailed summary of the passage, keeping it clear, complete, and easy to follow, while also showing the historical importance. Deep, detailed summary. Supreme Court and anti-corruption rule under the Regulating Act of 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773, passed by the British Parliament, gave the King of Britain, the Crown, the power to officially create a Supreme Court of Judicature in Bengal through a royal charter. This court was set up in 1774 in Calcutta with 4 judges, 1 Chief Justice, Sir Elijah Impey, and 3 puisne judges, Chambers, Lemaister and Hyde. Nature and powers of the Supreme Court. The court was designed to be multifunctional, meaning it combined the powers of several types of courts. 1. Court of Common Law, applied standard English legal rules. 2. Court of Equity, decided cases based on fairness where strict law might be inadequate. 3. Court of Admiralty, handled maritime disputes like shipping, trade and piracy. 4. Ecclesiastical Court, dealt with church-related issues such as marriage, wills and religious disputes. Because of this arrangement, the same court could hear all kinds of legal matters, civil, criminal, maritime and religious, instead of having separate courts for each. Who was under its authority? All public servants of the East India Company, from high-ranking officials to ordinary employees, could be taken to this court. All British subjects in Bengal, which included both Europeans and Indians recognised as subjects, could seek justice, redress, against unfair treatment, oppression, by officials or other individuals. The court could also hear complaints against anyone in the company's service or any of His Majesty's subjects in Bengal. Jurisdiction and legal procedure. The court had both original and appellate jurisdiction, meaning it could hear cases directly from the start. It could also review decisions made by lower courts. It could decide all types of cases and provide remedies using all the legal methods common in English courts at the time. Following British custom, cases were often heard with the help of a jury, made up of British subjects, in practice mostly Europeans. Judicial Team Judice 74, the Supreme Court began functioning with Sir Elijah Impey, Chief Justice; Chambers, Lemaister and Hyde, Puisan judges. Anti-corruption principle. The Regulating Act also introduced a clear rule against corruption. No person in a civil or military office under the Crown could accept any gift, bribe or reward, whether in cash or in kind, whether directly or indirectly. This applied to presents, donations, gratuities, or any other form of reward. The aim was to stop the widespread practice of officials receiving gifts in exchange for favours, a common abuse in earlier company administration. Historical significance. 1. First true British Supreme Court in India. It centralised judicial authority in Bengal over company servants. 2. Beginning of British legal control. English law and jury trials were formed to Indian governance. 3. Accountability of officials. Company employees could no longer claim immunity from prosecution. 4. Anti-corruption policy. Marked the first legislative step to control bribery and gift-taking in colonial administration. 5. Potential for conflict. The court's powers often overlapped with the company's own administrative systems, leading to tension. In short, the Regulating Act of 1773 created the Supreme Court in Bengal 1774, gave it wide powers over all cases and officials, introduced English law and jury trials, made company servants answerable to it, allowed people to seek justice against oppression, and laid down a strict rule banning officials from taking gifts or bribes. If you want, I can now also give you a comic strip-style visual of this, showing the king signing the charter, the court in session with judges and a jury, an Indian merchant complaining against an official, an officer refusing a gift to obey the anti-corruption rule. Do you want me to make that coloured comic next? Here's your great, deep, detailed summary of the assessment of the Act in plain, clear, yet thorough language, pulling together every important point so you have the full picture in one place. Detailed summary. Assessment of the Regulating Act of 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773 was Britain's first serious attempt to bring order to the East India Company's rule in India. However, when it was put into practice, it turned out to be confusing, weak and unworkable. 1. Governor-General's power was crippled. The Act created a Governor-General to be the top administrator in India. But he was forced to work with a council of 4 members who could overrule him by majority vote. This made the Governor-General's position weak. In fact, Warren Hastings, the first Governor-General, was often outvoted from 1774 to 1776, leaving him almost powerless. Supreme Court without clear boundaries. The Act set up a Supreme Court of Justice in Calcutta, but it didn't define the exact area it could control, the exact laws it should follow, how its authority was different from the Governor-General's Council. This lack of clarity led to conflicts between the court and the council. 3. The Act was vague and a compromise. The law tried to please everyone, the British Crown, the East India Company, and the Nawab of Bengal, and avoided making bold, clear rules. It didn't clearly declare that the British Crown was the ultimate ruler in India, nor did it remove the Nawab's ceremonial status. This left power sharing in a very uncertain state. 4. No clear control for anyone. The Act failed to give the British government definite control over the company, the company directors definite control over their officials in India, the Governor-General definite control over his council, the Calcutta Presidency definite control over the Madras and Bombay presidencies. In short, no one had final authority. 5. Theory of checks and balances failed in India. The Act was based on the idea that power should be divided so no one could misuse it. But in India, this didn't work because the situation on the ground was complex. The Act's design had serious flaws. Instead of balancing power, it caused constant fights. 6. Key defects in practice. A. Governor-General versus Council. Relations were tense and uncooperative. The Council often blocked the Governor-General's decisions. B. Supreme Court versus country courts. The Supreme Court used English laws while Bengal's country courts used local laws, causing clashes. C. Hostility between court and council. Both tried to control the same matters, leading to open rivalry. D. Judges ignored laws. The council could make laws, but the Supreme Court could choose to ignore them. E. No nearby higher authority. There was no supreme decision-maker in India to settle disputes between the executive and judiciary. The only authority was in England, far away and slow to respond. F. Weak control over... Calcutta couldn't effectively control... 7. Overall failure. In reality, the system collapsed when put to use. The Governor-General was too weak to lead decisively. The Council and Supreme Court were constantly at war over their powers. No one had final say, leading to administrative chaos. Madras and Bombay acted with considerable independence. Instead of improving governance, the Act produced confusion, delays, and inefficiency. Core reason for failure. The root problem was that the Act gave many people partial powers but no one full authority, creating overlapping powers, legal uncertainty, and endless disputes. Final one-sentence summary. The Regulating Act of 1773 tried to reform British rule in India by creating a Governor-General, a Council, and a Supreme Court, but gave no one clear authority, resulting in constant power struggles, legal confusion, weak control over provinces, and eventual breakdown of the system. If you want, I can now make you a visual diagram showing these power struggles like a web of arrows, so you can instantly see how everyone blocked everyone else. That makes it even easier to remember. Would you like me to prepare that? Here's your great detailed summary of the passage, fully unpacked and arranged so you can remember fusion. A deep, detailed summary, Regulating Act 1773 and its importance. 1. First serious British attempt to govern India. Was the first major law made by Britain to control how the East India Company ruled in India. This was different from other colonies like North America, where British settlers already lived and could easily set up British-style institutions. India was already a rich, complex and civilized country with its own systems, so copying British models blindly was risky. 2. Unique challenge. India was not an undeveloped land. Unlike places in South America or unsettled colonies, India had a long history of governance, cities, trade and law. The Act was like sailing in an uncharted sea. Britain was entering a completely new type of rule without a clear map. 3. Limited structure. Left details to the company. While the Act set broad rules, it didn't give clear instructions for day-to-day administration. The East India Company still had to decide many things on its own, leading to inconsistency in how different regions were run. 4. Main goals of the Act. Create honest and efficient supreme authorities in the 3 major presidencies, Bengal, Madras, and Bombay. Prevent abuse of power by company officials. Establish a Supreme Court of Judicature in Calcutta to ensure officials were accountable to the law. 5. Key principle introduced. In Britain, no public servant was above the law. Even powerful officials could be taken to court. The Act tried to bring this same principle to India, making officials legally answerable. 6. Outcome. Good intentions, poor execution. Although it was a well-meant attempt, the Act was made without understanding India's real needs and challenges. Instead of making things easier, it created more difficulties for Governor-General Warren Hastings. There were conflicts between the Governor-General's Council and the Supreme Court, unclear powers, and slow decision-making. Duration and replacement. The Regulating Act was in force 11 years, 1774. Hastings was the only Governor-General who worked entirely under it. In 1784, the Act was replaced by Pitt's India Act, which gave Britain stronger and clearer control over Indian administration. Essence in one sentence. The Regulating Act of 1773 was Britain's first big step to legally control the East India Company's rule in India, aiming for honest governance and accountability, but because it didn't understand India's complexity, it failed in practice and was replaced after just 11 years. If you want, I can now give you a timeline's cause and effect flowchart showing how intention turned into failure, so you'll remember it instantly in exams. Do you want me to prepare that next? All right, here's a great, deep, detailed summary of the whole thing we just went through, keeping it clear, simple, and very thorough so you can remember it easily. Summary: the origin and growth of the Indian Constitution, 1773 to 1947. Big picture. The Indian Constitution did not suddenly appear in 1947 to 1950. Its ideas and systems slowly developed over about 175 years during British rule. From 1773 onwards, the British passed many acts, laws in India to help them rule more effectively, mainly for their own benefit, but these laws also built the foundation of modern government in India. Tab 2. Two main phases of British constitutional experiments in India. Phase 1, under the East India Company, 1773 to 1857. Who ruled? A private British trading company called the East India Company. Why laws were made? The company was powerful but corrupt and mismanaged resources. Britain's Parliament wanted to control it. Key laws: Regulating Act 1773, first step to control the company's politics. Created a Governor-General of Bengal and a council, set up a Supreme Court in Calcutta. Pitt's India Act 1784 set up a board of control in London to supervise the company's political work. Charter Act 1793, 1813, 1833, 1853 changed the company's powers. 1813 ended company's trade monopoly, allowed missionaries, supported education. 1833, company stopped trading entirely, became just a governing body, introduced Governor-General of India. 1853, opened civil service exams in Britain, permanent lawmaking council. Outcome of this phase: created centralized administration, courts and civil services. But policies were exploitative, causing economic hardship for Indians. Phase 2, under the British Crown, 1857 to 1947. Why change happened? The revolt of 1857 showed the company failed. Britain took direct control. Who ruled? The British monarch, Queen King, through the Viceroy in India. Key laws: Government of India Act 1858 ended company rule, created Secretary of State for India in London. Indian Councils Act 1861 introduced legislative councils in provinces, included some Indians. Indian Councils Act 1892 allowed limited Indian representation and questions in councils. Indian Councils Act 1909, Morley-Minto reforms, increased Indian members in councils, created separate electorates for Muslims. Government of India Act 1919, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, introduced diarchy in provinces, split subjects into Indian-controlled and British-controlled. Government of India Act 1935 gave provincial autonomy, states could govern themselves in many areas, proposed a federation, expanded voting rights, created 2 houses in the central legislature. Outcome of this phase: gradual Indian involvement in governance. Training ground for Indian political leaders. Clearer structure for central and provincial governments. 3. How this led to the Indian Constitution. Borrowed systems from Britain. Parliamentary system, Prime Minister, Cabinet, Legislature, independent judiciary, courts separate from government control, civil service, permanent government officials, federal structure, central plus state governments. Lessons learned: rejected unfair systems like separate electorates, demanded equal voting rights and full self-rule. Nav 4. Short story version. Imagine India as a shop. First, a private manager, East India Company, ran the shop from 1773 to 1857. The owner, Britain, made rules to control the manager. In 1857, workers rebelled, so the shop owner, British Crown, took direct control. Over time, the owner allowed some workers, Indians, to help in running the shop. By 1935, workers were managing entire sections of the shop. In 1947, workers took full control and wrote their own rulebook, the Constitution. 5. Key takeaways. The British Acts from 1773 to 1947 were not meant to give Indians freedom. They were to strengthen British rule. But these acts introduced modern administrative systems, elections, even if limited, and the idea of representation. Indian leaders used this experience to build a constitution after independence, keeping useful parts and removing unjust ones. If you want, I can now make a clear visual table showing each act, year, main points and impact, so you have the entire history in one glance. That would make this even easier to study and revise. Here's your deep, detailed summary of the Regulating Act of 1773 in the clearest and most complete way possible. Deep summary, Regulating Act 1773. 1. Background: why it was passed. Who ruled India then? The East India Company, EIC, a British trading company, had turned into a political ruler after winning battles like Plassey 1757 and Buxar 1764. Bengal problems. In 1765, the company got Diwani rights from the Mughal emperor, right to collect taxes and handle civil cases. They ruled badly. Corruption, famine, 1770 Bengal famine, and high taxes made life worse for people. The company became rich for a while, but mismanagement and wars made it lose money by early 1770s. Bankruptcy danger. The company was losing money badly and was in debt to British bankers. Britain's worry. If the company collapsed, Britain's trade and political control in India would weaken. Parliament wanted control over the company's political actions, but didn't want to take over ruling India directly. 2. Purpose of the Act. Main aim: to regulate, control by rules, the EIC's administration in India and prevent further mismanagement. Not a takeover. Britain didn't remove the company, it only created a system to chower. First step towards centralized administration in India. Before this, different regions, Bengal, Bombay, Madras, ran almost independently. Main provisions of the Act: 1. Governor-General of Bengal. Warren Hastings became the first Governor-General, 1774. He controlled Bengal, Bombay and Madras in political matters. This was the first step to centralizing British Indian administration. 2. Governor-General's Council. A 4-member council was created to assist and check the Governor-General. Decisions were made by majority vote. Governor-General could be overruled by the council, so he couldn't act like a dictator. 3. Supreme Court at Calcutta, established in 1774 with a Chief Justice and 3 judges. It dealt with British subjects in Bengal, including both Europeans and Indians working for the company. 4. Ban on private trade and gifts. Company officials were forbidden from taking bribes or trading privately for personal profit. 5. Company's political work under British Parliament supervision. The company had to report its activities and financial accounts to the British government. 4. Why it's called a regulating act. Britain didn't take direct control of India. It simply regulated, controlled the company's power with rules. The company was still the ruler in name, but Parliament now had a say in how India was run. Lahammer 5. Significance: why it's important. First time, British Parliament interfered in Indian administration. Beginning of centralized government in India, Governor-General of Bengal became the top authority. Introduced written rules instead of arbitrary, random company rule. Set up the Supreme Court, first step in creating a proper judicial system in British India. Showed Britain's shift from pure trade focus towards political control of India. 6. Limitations, problems. The Act was confusing about the Supreme Court's powers, leading to conflicts between the court and the Governor-General's Council. It didn't fully stop corruption. Control over Bombay and Madras was still weak. It was only a first step. Later acts, Pitt's India Act 1780 etc., had to fix problems. Number 7. In short, one-line memory aid. Regulating Act of 1773 equals first British Parliament law to control East India Company, created Governor-General's Council, Supreme Court, centralized administration, but company still ruled under supervision. If you want, I can now make you a super easy visual chart showing before 1773 versus after 1773 changes. Key terms: Governor-General, Diwani rights, Supreme Court, with short definitions. This would make the whole thing stick in memory in less than 2 minutes. Do you want me to make that chart? Alright, here's a great deep detailed summary of the main provisions of the Regulating Act of 1773, written so it's crystal clear, easy to read and covers every important detail in depth. Summary of the main provisions of the Regulating Act, 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773 was the first major step taken by the British Parliament to control the activities of the East India Company in India. Before this act, the company was running India mostly like a private business, often in a corrupt and careless way, which led to political problems and economic decline in Bengal. This act was meant to regulate, control and guide the company's administration, reduce corruption and centralize authority. Part 1. British government control over the company. The East India Company was placed under the supervision of the King of England. The Court of Directors, the company's main decision-makers in London, had to report regularly to the British government about revenue, money earned from taxes, trade and other sources in India, civil affairs, administration, governance, justice, military affairs, army movements, wars, defences. Purpose. This made the company answerable to the British government, ensuring its actions in India were not completely independent. Impact. For the first time, the British government had an official say in Indian administration. 2. Creation of the Governor-General of Bengal. The Governor of Bengal became the Governor-General of all British territories in India. The Governor-General's office was based in Fort William, Calcutta. Warren Hastings became the first Governor-General in 1774. Purpose: to have one central authority for British-controlled India instead of separate, loosely connected presidencies. Impact. It started the process of centralized administration, which later grew stronger. Number 3. Governor-General's Executive Council. The Governor-General was assisted by a council of 4 members. They had collective decision-making power, meaning important matters were decided by majority vote, not just the Governor-General alone. Purpose: to prevent the Governor-General from having absolute power and to ensure important decisions were discussed and checked. Impact. This created a check and balance system, but in practice, it sometimes led to conflicts between the Governor-General and the Council. 4. Subordination of Bombay and Madras to Calcutta. The Bombay and Madras presidencies became subordinate to the Bengal-Calcutta presidency. Governors in Bombay and Madras had to follow orders from the Governor-General in Calcutta. Purpose: to bring uniformity in British policies and avoid conflicts between different presidencies. Impact. It made Calcutta the supreme administrative centre for British India. Number 5. Establishment of the Supreme Court at Calcutta, 1774. A Supreme Court was set up in Calcutta as the highest court of justice. It consisted of 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Sir Elijah Impey was the first Chief Justice. Purpose: to introduce British legal principles and provide a formal judicial system for British territories. Impact. It aimed to bring rule of law, but also created confusion and conflict because it overlapped with existing Indian courts and laws. 6. Ban on bribery and private trade by company officials. Company officials could not accept gifts or bribes from Indian rulers or traders. They were forbidden from running private businesses using company resources. Purpose: to reduce corruption and make officials work honestly for the company. Impact. In theory, it was a strong anti-corruption step, but in practice, enforcement was weak, and many officials found indirect ways to profit. Significance of the Act. First time the British Parliament directly interfered in India. Created the Office of Governing Power in Calcutta. Introduced a British-style judiciary in India. Tried to control corruption in the company. Laid the foundation for future acts like Pitt's India Act of 1784, which increased British government control even further. Had limitations. The British government still did not take full control. The company retained much power. The new system caused conflicts between the Supreme Court and the Governor-General. Corruption was reduced on paper, but not much in practice. Indians had no voice in this new structure. In short, the Regulating Act of 1773 was Britain's first big step to control the East India Company's rule in India, centralising authority under a Governor-General in Calcutta, creating a Supreme Court, banning corruption, and making the company accountable to the British government. Still had many weaknesses and left Indians out of decision-making. If you want, I can now make you a visual chart showing provision, purpose, impact, so you can remember it in seconds. Do you want me to prepare that? Alright, here's a deep, detailed, but still easy-to-read summary of the importance and defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. I'll make it complete so you can understand and also use it for exams. Summary of the Regulating Act, 1773. Importance and defects. Background. Before 1773, the East India Company was not just trading goods, it was also ruling over large parts of India after winning battles like Plassey, 1757, and Buxar, 1764. Its rule was uncontrolled and chaotic. Company officials often acted for personal profit, ignored local suffering, and there was no central plan for administration. The British Parliament in London decided to step in and regulate the company's affairs, leading to the Regulating Act of 1773. Hack importance, good points, achievements. First step to centralised administration. For the first time, the British government tried to bring all British territories in India under one central authority. The presidency of Bengal was made supreme over Bombay and Madras in political matters. 2. Recognition of political role. The Act officially accepted that the East India Company was not just a trader, but also a political ruler, collecting revenue, making treaties, and running an administration. 3. Written rules introduced. Earlier, the company's officers ruled however they wanted, arbitrary rule. The Act introduced a written constitution, a set of rules to guide governance. 4. Governor-General and Council system. A Governor-General of Bengal was appointed. Warren Hastings was the first. He was assisted by 4 council members. This collegium system prevented him from becoming a dictator. 5. Majority decision-making. Decisions were made by majority vote in the Governor-General's Executive Council. The Governor-General had to follow the majority's choice. 6. Control over foreign policy. Bombay and Madras could not start wars, sign treaties, or make alliances with Indian rulers without approval from the Governor-General and his council in Bengal. Had defects, weaknesses, failures. 1. Governor-General's weakness. The Governor-General had no veto power. He could not reject council decisions. This made him powerless in many cases. Warren Hastings was often outvoted by his council. 2. Unclear court powers. The Act set up a Supreme Court at Calcutta, but did not clearly define its powers and jurisdiction. This caused confusion and clashes between the court and the Governor-General. 3. Conflict between court and government. The Supreme Court could judge company officials, which led to fights over authority between the Governor-General and the judges. 4. Disobedience by Bombay and Madras. Even though Bengal was made the head, Bombay and Madras sometimes ignored orders and acted independently, starting wars or making alliances. 5. Weak parliamentary control. Parliament in London was supposed to oversee the company, but there was no proper system to study and act on the reports sent from India. This made supervision ineffective. 6. No care for Indian people. The Act was focused on British political and administrative matters. It did nothing to improve the lives of Indians. At that time, famines in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa were killing thousands, but the company continued collecting taxes. Overall significance. Positive. First real effort by Britain to organise the governance of its territories in India. Brought in written rules, centralised power in Bengal, and controlled foreign policy. Negative. Created power struggles between Governor-General and Council. Caused legal confusion between government and Supreme Court. Ignored the welfare of the Indian people. Hash! One-line conclusion. The Regulating Act of 1773 was a historic first step towards centralised British administration in India, but its unclear rules, weak leadership structure, and neglect of Indian welfare meant that it failed to fully solve the problems it was meant to address. If you want, I can now make you a visual diagram that shows the importance versus defects in one single glance, perfect for revision. Do you want me to make that diagram?